roses were living the dream.
To you, my darling.
No, to you.
Until it all came crashing down.
He got fired.
Fired?
On August 29th, stop.
You stop!
And see The Roses. Rated R. In theaters everywhere, August 29th.
Getting ready to step into your career era? Set yourself apart with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Hone your skills with apps like Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and more, powered with the latest in creative AI. Students save over 55% so you can build a portfolio you're proud of. Launch your future with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Visit adobe.com/students to learn more.
Welcome into the Tour Coach, everybody. Once again, I'm your host, Tony Ruggiero, here on the Tour Coach podcast. Big few weeks coming up. I'm going to be headed this week up to the Open Championship in Scotland. And as we've been doing all through the summer, spring and summer, leading up to and through each major, we're running a contest here on the Tour Coach as well as on our DewSweeper TV on our YouTube page with the Pro Work episodes that are out. We're going to give away a set of Srixon irons. We're going to draw the Monday after the British Open, the Open Championship for everybody. We're going to give away a set of Srixon irons to one lucky winner. We're going to give away a Wingman Mini from Bushnell. And we're going to give away a little DewSweeper Vineyard Vines prize pack. All you have to do to register for this drawing is go to DewSweeper TV on YouTube. That's DewSweeper TV on YouTube, where you can watch some of our podcasts in video and some live action. But on any of those, all you got to do is like, subscribe, and comment on any video, hashtag ProWork, hashtag DewSweeper TV, or hashtag Tour Coach. And we've got so much good stuff going on here on the podcast, and with all the content we're coming out. These are the people and the stories and the folks that I work with, meet with, run across, teach in my daily day-to-day travels, from whether it's in Mobile at my studio to down at Old Palm in Palm Beach Gardens, or maybe even hanging out at Joey D's gym a little with Colby Touye and Aaron McConley, or up at Bluebell in Philly, or a live event or a tour event, or wherever it is we may travel teaching the game of golf. We're going to be bringing it to you here on the Tour Coach. It's insight designed to help you teach, grow, and play the game better. None of this would be possible without my boy Mitch McConnell, McConnell Automotive, Buick GMC, Bushnell Golf, Srixon Cleveland Golf, and, of course, the folks back home, Stokely's Midtown Garden Center. You can't forget Blaine, or Taylor, Martino, and Rowan, our boy Ed Rowan. But thanks for all the support through all the years. Keep listening here to the Tour Coach. Go to DewSweeper TV on YouTube. I think you're going to like what you see, and a good chance to win some irons and some other cool gifts from Bushnell and Vineyard Vines through the end of the Open. At the Open Championship, we're in Bluster every day today. I'm hoping, I know you are as well, that we get a little break and it calms down a little bit this afternoon. Obviously, you've done a great job with Sam Horsfield's putting. Started it around the first of the year. I want to talk before we get into some of the things about just putting in general. I've followed you on social media and stuff. Talk a little bit about what you think. So to me, this is an interesting venue because with the wind, the weather, the factors, for sure these greens are slower than you would have encountered at Pinehurst or Augusta or Valhalla. Talk to me a little bit about what, the difference between putting here. What are some keys for players that, as people watch through the weekend here, as they watch the players at the Open and at Troon, what are some things that you think that people can watch for when it comes to putting? What's a key to success here this week?
Well, definitely, anytime you play links golf in the UK, the greens are very different to what you might find at a typical PGA Tour event or a live event. Sam's obviously just come back from, Valderrama last week. It was really burnt out. The greens were pretty crisped up.
They were crisp. They were great, yeah.
You were there, I think, Tony, right?
Yeah, there on the weekend, or I got in on Friday, and those greens, they had a lot of speed to them. Yeah. And it was also, when you're comparing there to here, you had to putt defensively, I thought, there, right? Yeah. There were places and situations on greens where you had to make sure you didn't three putt or worse. Yeah. There were places you could putt it off the green.
Yeah.
to me, that's not an issue here. Obviously the greens are big.
A little bit more aggressive within reason. It's a major tournament at the end of the day, right? You don't want to shoot yourself out of it.
Right.
The main thing I've been concerned this week has been around the fact that the amount of breaks he was getting last week, if he's an aim point user or whatever your method is of using green reading, you're typically going to get a lot more break last week than you are on a typical putt this week. And the reasons for that being that these greens are very much subtle undulations. So you may get the occasional 1 or 2% break, but oftentimes it's a double breaker or a triple breaker because you're going across knuckles, off the bunkers and things like that. Yeah. So typically then you have to be very, very good at aiming just slightly left or right of the hole and account for what the double break might be on that particular putt. So there's an awful lot of greens that are going to have a lot of double breakers, and there may be occasional greens where you get a very singular breaking putt, which is in the low numbers, not huge amounts of break.
I found these greens to be very difficult to read.
Yeah.
I found that there were some places where the ball would get to the hole and almost go opposite of what you would think. And you really had to do a good job of looking at the surroundings as a whole about to see what the ball's going to do. Thought they were really tricky.
Typically, flatter surfaces or more planar surfaces that are flatter, 0s, 1s, 2s, they are harder to read because it's not so obvious, right? It's not so visually obvious.
That's a good point.
When it's closer to 0, it's sometimes hard. You think around a hole that's just got one single slope going through the middle of it. If you think of that as like 360 different putts around the degrees of a circle that you could get, there's only 2 of those putts that are going to be straight, right? The uphill and the downhill. So, typically flatter putts are harder to identify, but once you've identified them, you're aiming straight, so you should be able to sort of feel them. You've got to be really clear with your own green moving.
So let me ask you this, because you brought this up when we talked about what we're going to talk about. So we're talking about coaching elite players or recreational golfers or what. How do you, if at all, explain or teach or help people putting? What difference is there for you between those two? Because obviously a lot of the fundamentals are the same. But how do you go about? I mean, do you teach them both the same way, or where do you go from there?
I would say my objectives still are the same. In my opinion, there's 3 key skills with putting. You've got the ability to start the ball on line, the ability to read greens, and then the ability to match your speed to that green read. And those would be my principles, no matter who I'm working with, really.
I love that.
It's pretty simple. You could add maybe a 4th dimension for the elite player who's got to be able to do it. So this week, under the most insane amount of pressure, you've got to be able to do those 3 skills under serious pressure. But whatever student or whichever kind of player I've got in front of me, I'm looking at which one of those 3 maybe a combination of those 3 needs to get some attention. Typically with the more amateur player, beginner golfers, young juniors, etc., they often haven't realised the importance of having a putting lesson. Even sometimes that can be a little bit of a novelty for a lot of players to begin with. As you tend to get up to more elite levels, players tend to have a little bit more of an idea of what they've already done to get to that point and what their stroke pattern is. So then you're trying to fine tune and refine one of those 3 skills, really.
Here's a question, because you could take this all the way up through the golf swing, actually. But when you get a player, it could be at any level, that's a reasonably good putter. But maybe their fundamentals don't match traditional stuff.
Yeah.
Do you change it, or how do you approach it? Because, let's just take somebody that's a good player, single digit, maybe better, or even a little worse. But they when you ask them, hey, I'm, how do you putt? And they're like, I've always been a pretty good putter. And then you look at where their hands are, how the stroke, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think I would always look for function over form. I'm certainly not going to stand there and have to make a change just to make it look good on Instagram or good on video or whatever. There's no point in that. It has to achieve a reasonable outcome that's based on. So for me, I wouldn't base it on how it looks, or maybe they're aiming left and their shoulders square, or their eye line's a bit tilted. Ultimately, when you see one of those slightly unorthodox kind of setup positions or stroke sort of tendencies, it might lead to something down the road that maybe they haven't even identified yet. So there's a bit of a judgment call on the coach's part to think, okay, could I maybe foresee that change that might need to be happening? kind of warm them up to the idea of making that change, or do I need to hang fire and wait until it is an issue and then take action then? But ultimately, putting is the one area of the game where you can get away with a few quirks, right? You see all these different types of putting grip, different holds, different setup positions. You see people practicing in multiple different ways. So it is the one skill that probably anything you can get away with a lot more. So ultimately, I think you've got to look for function and skill rather than just making it look pretty and look orthodox, you could say.
Because when you look, heck, you watch all the videos here on this, old time, past champions, and there's certainly a lot of different styles.
Yeah.
But it seems to me, probably some of this is because obviously we know more about stuff now. There's more, like you guys all have technology, just like we do.
There's a lot more data available now for putting rather than...
You look at those old videos, there were a lot of different styles. But if we walked on the putting green over here, you would see some different grips and maybe slightly different postures and things. But I would feel like they all fall. I mean, they're more nowadays than ever fall within.
They're a little bit more orthodox looking, certainly. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, so
I think that's probably a resultant of the instruction, people starting to become more putting specialists. 10 years ago there weren't many putting specialists, other than maybe Harold Swash and Phil Kenyon and a few others, Stan Utley and guys like that. Whereas nowadays there's a lot more guys like myself who are excited and happy to help guys with their putting, and it's a lot more of a common thing to have a putting coach as well as a full swing coach.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's become, obviously as I handle most of the time full swing. Every now and then I have some players where I do all of it. But putting's certainly not my specialty. And more on the elite level, you have players that have some sort of a putting or short game specialist, for sure. Yeah. So for just recreation, anybody listening out there that wants to get better at putting, you talked about the three things that you thought were important. When you look at golfers that struggle putting, is there one or two things that you see that transcend the others where, like, this is a common thing that gets people going down the wrong road putting? Is there one or two things where you're like,
a few myths out there, right? That I think one of them that springs to mind is, as we've been talking a bit about putting today, straight back, straight through as an idea. I think is certainly I came across that many years ago.
We all did,
and certainly, it sounds very sexy on the tin. It kind of sounds like it should be right, and certainly I think a lot of the time the amateurs realise that they go, well, straight back, straight through sounds perfect, and oftentimes they're doing such a small stroke that it might look straight back, straight through, but when you actually expand that putting stroke out, there should be, for most people, there should be a very gentle arc to the putting stroke, and if I'm talking in fact, that would be the case. Now, that's not to say sometimes I might give somebody a feel of going straight back, straight through. Let's say somebody who arcs it massively inside, and that's leading to flaws in their putting stroke. You might need to get them to feel, hey, just try and almost feel like your putting stroke's nearly straight back. I would never go straight through as well, typically, but, at the end of the day, straight back, straight through is a fact. We've measured it on Sam Putt Lab, we've measured it on Capto. Great putting strokes typically don't do that. People can attempt it, and they'll often take it back straight and then pull it left with their stroke as they arc it to the left on the way through. So typically that kind of concept isn't going to be helpful for most, but there are times at which you might need to feel a little bit of it in order to correct maybe an overly arcing inside and backstroke, for example. Like anything,
no different than a full swing. If somebody's takeaway backswing gets too inside, you tell them to take it outside, and you don't really want it outside. It's a feel, right?
I think Phil Kenyon told me this a couple of years ago. He said a swing thought doesn't necessarily have to be scientifically correct in order to be helpful, and that's quite a cool little way. We could apply the same short game or a full swing.
Correct.
Right? I might not stand up in front of a room full of coaches and say, yes, I believe straight back, straight through is the way forward. But I might, to a certain player in that moment, decide, actually, this guy could do that little sentence to help trigger something that I want to happen in the backstroke, for example, or another version of a myth that might be out there. So straight back, straight through would be certainly one thing that frustrates me. Something else that often frustrates me is I would say about 90% of the golfers that I've ever given a putting lesson to, at first they tend to underread putts. So that is, I think the way that our eyes are configured and how we see straight, I think oftentimes people get overly obsessed with the apex and they forget that the ball actually breaks between the start of the putt and the apex. So I think that's led to an issue for a lot of amateur golfers who under-read putts. Typically the guys out here don't do that, so success leaves clues. Let's try and
I think that's one reason why on greens like this with subtle breaks, it is harder because they don't under-read things, right?
It's a little bit easier to be to putt well here because there's a lot more double breakers and there's less break, more 1%, 2% breaking putts rather than the big 3s, 4s, 5s down big tiers that you might have seen at Valderrama last week, for example.
Yeah, there's crazy stuff. Yeah. John, awesome stuff, man. You're doing some great stuff with Sam, and you got a bunch of folks. Enjoyed hanging out here at the Open with you. You're going to go out and walk with JP and watch us enjoy the beautiful weather.
Yeah, well, we're last off today, so I've got a little bit of a wait.
I know. We're 30 minutes ahead, so we're gonna finish after dinner. I know that. So, anyways, best of luck to you guys this week. Some great insight for the folks that watch us, and we'll have this up on the pod as well. So appreciate you, buddy.
Appreciate you too. Thanks, man.
Hi, this is Tony Ruggiero. And look, recently, several teachers I know and several players have had some scares with skin cancer. In fact, I recently went and saw a dermatologist here in town, and I had a couple things frozen off, eyelid, my face, my earlobe, and not getting any younger. And I know it's getting to that time of the season where it's cooler, but look, being in the sun is a real deal, and I've not been very good, to be totally honest, my whole career at using it at all because I didn't like how greasy it was, how hard it was to get off your hands, how it clogged up my pores. And then I found this sunscreen, Visor Skincare. It's clear, it goes on, it doesn't dry you out, it isn't greasy, it's like you didn't put anything on. By far, it's the best sunscreen I've ever used. Without a doubt, is the easiest to use. And we've got a discount code for all of you. All you have to do is go to visorskincare.com, is use our code word DewSweeper. visorskincare.com, code word DewSweeper. I just want to remind everybody something that I forgot. Recently, a couple weeks ago, my wife and I went out. We went to a wedding, and afterwards with some friends, we were like, hey, where's a great place to go? I'll be honest, in my travels and day-to-day, sometimes I get caught up and I forget some of the great places right around the corner. But I got to remind you about the Icebox Bar on 755 Monroe Street. I was blown away by just the whole vibe, the atmosphere, and with the Velvet Pig, the food in the back room, and the big screen TVs up front. We sat there and watched some playoff games. I was blown away by the atmosphere, the vibe, and just how cool it was to have the Icebox Bar right here near the DewSweepers downtown, near where I live. You're looking for a great place to go sit, watch some games, hang out, play some pool, you got to go to the Icebox Bar right there on Monroe Street. There's a good chance you'll see all of us hanging out. But do yourself a favor, go visit the Icebox. It's one of the best places out there.